Okay, folks, so I've met a lot of you who are on the call tonight, so it's great to have some of you back with us. But for those I haven't met, my name is Stephanie Pulley. I am the state coordinator for the University of Maryland Extension Master Gardener program. It's a fantastic program. We've got a lot of Master Gardeners on with us tonight, but if you hadn't heard about it, feel free to drop me a line in the chat and I'm happy to share additional information about it. So just let me know anytime. So next, I'd like to introduce our speaker. This has been a long time coming. We've had so many requests for a presentation from him for our group, and we're very excited to have finally gotten a spot on his schedule. So Dr. Samuel Ramsey is a graduate initially in undergrad from Cornell, but more recently he did study in Dr. Dennis Van Engelsdorp's bee lab at College Park. So for those of you that are familiar with the entomology work that we do over there, he's a graduate of UMD, a fellow TERP alum. We are so excited to have him with us, and he's just been doing all kinds of incredible work since he graduated. He started his own foundation, and his research has just taken him to the most amazing places all over the world. And I know a lot of you have been following that. So with that, Dr. Ramsey, I'll turn it over to you. We are just so honored and excited to have you with us tonight.
Thank you so much. I'm really glad to be back here. I actually just moved to Colorado, and so this is a great moment for me to be, back amongst Marylanders.
Welcome. Glad to have you.
Thank you. So I'm going to share my screen now.
Wonderful.
And let's optimize for video sharing. And this should work. Perfect.
Yep.
No, I was actually really excited that you requested this particular presentation, and also a little bit nervous because it kind of requires me to tell my own story about the contexts that I've seen of diversity within academia and ways that hasn't always gone well. And so brace yourselves. This context can be a bit difficult or uncomfortable to talk about. But the diversity that we see in an ecosystem and the diversity that we see in the man-made systems that we've established all around us, there's actually a lot of similarities there and a lot of things that we can learn one from another. And so I'd like to make those parallels here and just kind of give you a crash course in the understanding that I've developed over time of biodiversity and diversity in bio. What biological systems can teach us about justice, equity, diversity, and inclusion. So let's jump right in. I'm Dr. Samuel Ramsey. As Stephanie has already explained, I am the new professor of entomology at CU Boulder, and I am really excited to be talking about diversity because I study entomology. And the first thing that I told my students my very first lecture for the insect bio course that I'm currently teaching is that insect bio is the study of diversity. Excuse me. There is no more diverse group of organisms on this planet than insects. 3/4 of the organisms, of the animals that exist on this planet are insects. And so oftentimes when people think about diversity, they think about all the different birds and all the different frogs that there are. But really, the best place to study diversity is within groups of insects. And something that we've really learned about the concept of diversity is that diversity can truly just be broken down into this one category. Diversity is the multiplicity of ways that creatures have learned to solve problems and make an environment work for them. And the data have been pretty clear over time that diversity is incredibly important. It's incredibly important to developing ecosystems, incredibly important to establish ecosystems. It is not something that is just kind of expendable. Now, modeling has made it very clear that in circumstances in forests and meadows and grasslands, savannas, when there is a diversity of plants there, that ecosystem is always healthier than when there are just a few plants there, even if you keep the number of plants exactly the same. So if there were 5,000 individual plants in an area and they all came from 5 species, or there were 5,000 plants in an area and all of them came from 500 different species, that place with the 500 different species is an area where there is greater diversity. Those creatures have learned how to develop and manage the different things that the environment throws at them in different ways that have allowed them not to step on each other's toes, that have allowed them to create all of these different kinds of ecological niches that have made that entire region much healthier. And so we see greater plant species richness in connection with greater health in those ecosystems. We've learned that the impacts of biodiversity are quite broad and quite widespread. And one of the biggest impacts is productivity. Especially, and once again, this is a study that was, these studies have oftentimes been conducted in plants and freshwater ecology. But you see a great deal more productivity, especially in areas where individuals are fishing. They're trying to obtain a huge amount of fish. In an area where there is greater diversity, there is usually greater productivity, there is greater resource turnover, there are more fish, there are healthier fish, there are larger fish, and that ecosystem can support more people as a result of it. When this work has been conducted on plants, we've also shown the same. And so it's been very important as something to understand within agricultural communities as well. And one of the reasons for this huge effect that's been measured many times is that diversity, the currency of evolution is diversity. When creatures are diverse, they have the capacity to deal with a multitude of different issues in a number of different ways. And so they can deal with it if there is a forest fire, because their diversity of genes allows them to tackle those issues in different ways. They can deal if there are perturbations such as tsunamis and even things that you wouldn't expect an ecosystem to be able to come back from. That diversity allows them a huge amount of resilience. We see this in marine ecosystems, we see this in terrestrial ecosystems. The data have been very clear for a long, long time. That information is even clear when it comes to the group of organisms that I study, and a group of organisms that I'm sure is very important to all of you here as master gardeners. Honeybees are incredibly important creatures. Our native bees are very, 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 very important organisms and kind of outweigh the bees in a number of ways. There are 4,000 species of native bees in North America alone, which is quite remarkable. There's one species of honeybee. We do dedicate a lot of attention to the honeybees because they bring about $18 billion to the United States economy every year. And so we sunk a lot of our time, effort, energy, and thought into trying to better understand what is going on with our honeybees. They just seem to be doing very poorly, and we try to tackle one of the issues, and they seem to still do pretty poorly. Well, what's been shown time and time again is that there are a multitude of issues that they're dealing with all at the same time. Parasites, pathogens, pesticides, monoculture, poor food sources, there's substantial destruction of their habitat, climate change, and in general, poor management has been a substantial issue. Now, honeybees have dealt with a lot of these issues for a long time, but what has really been shown to be dragging them down quite substantially is the issues that we've seen with inbreeding. Their genetics aren't robust and diverse enough for them to truly deal with the multiplicity of issues that they have been faced with. If they had broader and more diverse genetics, they'd be able to deal with a broader range of issues, because once again, diversity is the multitude of ways that an organism is able to solve lots of different sets of problems that are thrown at them. And our bees are lacking that because the majority of them have come from just a few queen breeders around the United States. There have been more than a few events that have caused genetic bottlenecks and have led to our bees being substantially less diverse than they were before. Diversity is something that we consistently see as a very, very, very important theme in our bees. Now, we know that there are a lot of benefits to diverse ecosystems. With just the level of productivity alone, more than 70% of the pharmacologically active agents in the world are from areas with really, really, really high biodiversity. And unfortunately, these are also the areas that are being targeted for slash and burn agriculture and deforestation of places like the Amazon that is being deforested at a rate that is quite remarkable at this point. A lot of pharmacologically active products are things that can be chemotherapeutics and that can help us as human beings deal with the different biological issues that we face on a regular basis. So one of the reasons why it's so terrible that we are losing a lot of the diversity in our ecosystems is because we don't want to have to reinvent the wheel. There are so many problems that we learned to solve. The very first antibiotic was discovered not because we created it, but because we saw that another organism had a power that we were so excited to see and that we desperately needed. Human beings, we think we are the most creative creatures on the planet. We are just very good at plagiarizing, because a lot of people don't know. We didn't invent paper. Wasps invented paper. And ancient Egyptians watched them take reeds and pieces of plants and chew them up and mix them with saliva and spread them thin. And they thought, oh, wow, movable printed type, that could change the world. Now, one of the only irrevocable changes that can really be made to this planet is that when we destroy an organism, when we lead to its extinction, it's gone forever. That set of genes is gone. That organism is gone. Aside from some Jurassic Park style resurrection, that creature is not coming back. And with it, all of the ways that it learned to solve the problems of the world around it are gone as well. And that can be devastating. There have been plants that we've found in areas like the Amazon and areas like the Palawan Islands in the Philippines with incredible pharmacological benefits. With the ability to shrink tumors, with the ability to help with eye issues. And then we've gone back to those areas to try to find more of those plants to extract those benefits. And those areas have already been deforested or destroyed. We can expand our problem-solving capacity greatly, potentially immeasurably, if we harness the power of diversity. Diversity is an incredible thing. We've also seen that there are multiple different elements of biodiversity that all go into how an ecosystem functions. And it's quite remarkable because it functions as this very convoluted and complex web that I'm sure you guys are already quite well aware of. But just to kind of recap, as all of these different elements of the environment work together, so the organisms and the abiotic factors of the environment create an ecosystem. And within that ecosystem, a suitability is developed so that other creatures can come into that ecosystem, abide there, develop remarkable advantages and changes, and that then creates greater suitability for more creatures in other ways. So the same ways that the forest canopy and the leaf litter are able to protect the soil. They protect the soil from erosion and things of that nature. That is actually very beneficial to us. We have seen the devastating effects of climate change. We've seen how storms have gotten to be more powerful. And in areas that have been deforested, the impacts of climate change are a lot stronger because when those storms tear through, they don't have the trees as a source of protection from the wind. They don't have those trees as a source of protection for the soil itself. And so then we end up with issues like erosion and huge mudslides and landslides that can kill a lot of people. But as those forest tree roots bind the soil, they prevent erosion. As the trees fall over and die, their decomposition processes allow for them to provide a ton of nutrients to a number of different organisms. It's all just a complicated, interconnected cycle. I'm wondering if it would be better for me to take questions as I go or save them till the end. I think if I save them till the end, it actually might allow for a better flow. So why don't we go in that direction?
Yeah, that sounds good. There is like a little bar on the bottom of the screen now. I don't know if there's like a toolbar on your end that's up. maybe.
Yeah, that's the little zoom bar. Let me see if I can hide it.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah,
That thing is always getting in the way.
it is always getting in the way. Let me see if there's there we go. Hide floating panel.
Yeah, that should help.
Perfect. There we go. All right.
Great, thank you.
Thank you.
Mhm.
We've seen this in freshwater environments. We've seen this in multiple environments. But what about diversity in the lab? Well, I'm glad you asked. The data are really clear about that as well. Groups of highly diverse problem solvers all working together have been shown to have the ability to outperform what we considered, or what they considered to be in this study, higher ability problem solvers. These higher ability problem solvers had more advanced degrees than the other individuals. They had degrees from more prestigious institutions and were decorated far better, but consistently throughout the work that these individuals conducted, and consistently throughout the statistics that they were able to look at in all of this, by aggregating all of this data from years and years of research, they were able to show that the groups of individuals who were all coming together from different backgrounds, different countries, different ways of thinking, were able to construct projects that were much more complex and that were actually much more highly honored in a number of ways. And we've seen that this applies to ethnic diversity, diversity of where people are coming from, their backgrounds, and we've also seen that this applies to gender diversity. And why would all of that be the case? Well, there have been a lot of hypotheses about this because this trend has been seen for some time now. And one of the hypotheses that seems to hold the most water is that as individuals come together from a bunch of different backgrounds, they force the people that they're working with to question their accepted assumptions and their conclusions about things. Because when you have to explain something to somebody that you know that they've never, that they're not familiar with, sometimes it causes you to think through, well, wait a minute, I'm not sure that I do know that, or I'm not sure that that's been proven. And it's really caused individuals to dive deeply into their understanding of the world around them and what they think they believe about different elements of their own field. What we've also seen in this system is that when you bring together different groups of problem solvers and different groups of researchers, they bring different skill sets, but they also bring different ways of thinking. Because your way of thinking and your way of solving problems comes from everything that has shaped you, the entirety of your background. And when a bunch of people with very similar backgrounds come together, they often think about solving problems in the same way. But when individuals from different backgrounds come together, and you may be seeing the parallels here that I was explaining with biology, they have different ways of solving problems. And by bringing together all those different ways of thinking about a problem, thinking about how to ask the question, which is just as important as how you go about tackling that question, it's been shown that that has quite an ability to boost the performance of that team. But the data are also clear that we are not doing great in the categories of diversity, equity, and inclusion in science. And even if we look at this as a matter of gender parity, about 49% of researchers are white men in the United States, according to the National Science Foundation's reports on the subject. Women make up only about 18%, or white women make up only about 18%. Black women, about 2%. And it doesn't get much better from there. We also find that this plays out in the unemployment rate. Individuals who are from underrepresented groups are twice as likely to be unemployed with the exact same level of educational attainment as their white counterparts. And for me, this has played out in a very important question that I've asked several times since I was a little kid. So some of you may be well aware, I am an entomologist. I study insects. I've been very excited to study insects and have been doing so since I was 7 years old. And so I've had a lot of time to ask the question, what exactly does an entomologist look like? And not too long after I could ask questions like this, the magic of internet search tools came up, and I was able to really look at the world of entomologists. And I found that entomologists look like this, and like this, and like this. But what I really needed to see at that age was that entomologists look like this. Because there's a saying that I really appreciate: you can't be what you can't see. And it's so true. When we ask the question, why don't we see a lot of people of color in these different fields? Well, oftentimes it's because the momentum that's carried forward in this field, having so many people, such a homogenous community, it becomes a problem as people look at that field and think, oh, okay, so that one's not for me. That one's for groups of people who look and sound and behave and think very differently from me. And so, as an entomologist, I've tried to do what I can to communicate science and connect with people. I'm always at different career day events and trying to be a source of outreach in that capacity so that I can be visible and let people know that an entomologist looks like this too. Because what happens when this is all that we see is that this continues to be all that we see. The momentum carries things forward. And the problem becomes when we get magazines and outreach from so many different directions. They say you can be an entomologist, but you doesn't always mean you. It's that finger isn't always pointing at the little Black kid there, or the Hispanic girl who wants to be an entomologist. And I've been leaning pretty heavily on the National Science Foundation statistics, but I've found this to be quite fascinating. If you look at the National Science Foundation statistics that they maintain every year for how many people in each field are awarded a degree, it's fascinating to see the racial breakdown. Because for most years that I've checked so far, 0 degrees, 0 PhDs have been awarded to African Americans in the field of entomology. In 2017, just 1 PhD was awarded to an African American in the field of entomology. 0 in soil science, meteorology, plant genetics, and several other fields. Now, I think we're starting to see that there is a problem there. But oftentimes when people talk about this kind of problem, we are told very quickly, we don't want to get involved in politics. This is all too political. I don't want to hear these woke discussions of this and of that. And, you should see some of the comments that show up on my YouTube videos when I talk about these sorts of things. I have stirred up the hornet's nest. And it's not my goal to be political in this way. But I do think that we need to acknowledge that the same people who are saying that this is all diversity for diversity's sake and that there is no innate benefit to diversity aren't acknowledging that our numbers come from a different culture, our alphabet from another, our culinary styles from tons of different cultures, our artwork, music, pretty much everything that makes us great is the result of us sharing in what makes another culture great, bringing together all of those remarkable qualities, blending it in that melting pot, and then producing something that is uniquely its own. That has always been our strength. And I'm sorry that that has become a political thing to say, but hopefully the connection to the scientific elements of it will help you see that there is a biological benefit to this, and, well, there's a scientific benefit to it. And let me connect you with a little bit of what happened at the University of Maryland when I was a graduate student, because I want you to know that diversity is valuable. These organisms are called varroa mites. They're a parasite of honeybees. They climb onto the body of the honeybee. And that is about where the story got a little bit foggy, because we've been told since the late 1960s that these parasites were feeding on the bee's blood. And that came from some misunderstandings with mistranslations of articles about these creatures. But since that time, it has been unquestioned that the exclusive food source of this creature is the bee's blood. And so we have had thousands of researchers trying to understand how a creature extracting a small amount of the bee's blood could possibly cause the 9 different pathologies that we've seen, all the different issues that have all come together to make this creature, Varroa destructor, what has made this creature the key and primary concern in the trend of colony losses that we have seen over the last several years. Now, they were found in the United States for the first time in 1987. They are an invasive species from Southeast Asia. And within just 10 years of their introduction, they had killed off nearly all of the unmanaged colonies in the US. Now, in some places, the colonies have been making a rebound, but for the vast majority of the United States, the only honeybee colonies that we have left are managed colonies that are being managed by beekeepers. And were they not managed by beekeepers, we would not still have them. So the million-dollar question has been, for me, the million-dollar question was, what is this creature doing right here and right now? Because to my mind, it wasn't feeding on the bee's blood, or at least that was an open question. I tried to find the earliest source saying that these creatures fed on the bee's blood because I wanted to see what experimental evidence was provided there. And when I finally found it, a paper from the former Soviet Union written in Russian, I had a researcher and friend of mine actually translate this article and found that it did not say that these parasites were feeding on the bee's blood. It said that they seemed to be feeding on a fluid, and that the hemolymph, or the bee's blood, seemed to be the only fluid accessible to their mouth parts, but that an experiment would need to be conducted to confirm this. And unfortunately, through issues of translation and individuals citing citations of citations of citations, this was kind of just disclosed to people as fact. And it carried on ever since. So as a graduate student, I decided to tackle this and really get a feel for what these parasites were doing. And I wanted to understand if they had the sort of digestive system that it really takes to digest and deal with a meal that is primarily water, because the bee's blood is mostly water with a little bit of dissolved nutrients in it. And in order to really deal with a meal like that and be able to be healthy when consuming a meal of that nature, an organism has to have a modified digestive system, like the one that you can see on your screen now. This is the filter chamber of a type of insect that has a straw as a mouthpart, the true bugs that we call hemipterans. And these creatures are only able to feed on fluids, as you probably guessed, from this straw-like mouthpart. So they have a lot of digestive system modifications, chief among them being the filter chamber. Now, this is the esophagus of the organism. It runs into the creature's body, doubles around, and then it touches the hindgut, or the rectum, of the insect before the food is allowed to travel into the creature's body. And then it exchanges all of that excess water into the rectum, where it is excreted, so that the water doesn't build up and cause the creature to swell to ginormous size while only getting a small number of nutrients. This allows them to concentrate all of the nutrients in their digestive system and get rid of the excess water. But what we find with the varroa mites is that they are not excreting a large volume of water. Their excrement is actually a very, very dry crystalline substance, guanine, which typically results from the breakdown of organ meats. It is a heavily nitrogenous waste product. And so it was my goal to figure out what exactly was going on here, because a lot of things weren't meshing with this idea that they were feeding on the bee's blood. Their digestive system wasn't structured properly. They're very distantly related from any other creatures that feed on their host's blood. And in addition to all of that, their eggs are ginormous. They produce an egg that's nearly 40% of their body volume every single day. That level of efficiency biologically is insane, and it is not something that you would expect from a creature feeding on a nutrient-poor resource like blood. So I decided to tackle this problem by biostaining the bee's blood, which you can see here in yellow. Here's a sample of it with the fluorescence microscopy using our confocal microscope. And then you can see a really important organ in their body. It's called the fat body. It is the liver of the bee, which has been stained red. And you can see that there's so much blood in the bee's body that it is outshining all of that red from the fat body tissue from the bee's liver. So then we exposed the mites to the bees, and you've probably already gotten ahead of me here, and you know what we're looking for. If the mites are feeding on the bee's blood, they should be glowing yellow. If they're feeding on the bee's fat body tissue, their liver, then they should be glowing red. And that's what we got. every time we conducted this study, that's what we got. It was very, very evident that when they climbed onto the bodies of those adult bees, they pierced the integument of the bee, sucked out a large volume of that tissue, and they liquefy it first, which is really problematic for the bees because even though they can't eat the entire liver of the bees, all of that saliva that they leave behind continues breaking down fat body tissue and makes the bees very sick. And you can even see the entire structuring of their digestive system just in globules of fat body tissue that they have consumed in the feeding process. As we really looked closely at these creatures, I wanted to provide some clear visual aids to individuals who are trying to understand how these creatures are interacting. And so we flash froze in liquid nitrogen a honeybee that had this parasite feeding on it. And then I very carefully and with a very, very, very sharp blade struck right at the point where the mite was touching the bee's body, and it caused it to fracture in two. And I was able to look into the bodies of both organisms. And you can see the digestive system of the mite here with substantial similarities to the fat body tissue that you see here from the inside of the honeybee's body. It was absolutely really, really, really exciting work to be able to conduct. And there's a lot more that had to go into this project. I don't want to go into all the details of it because there's more to this presentation, but suffice it to say, this was considered to be a valuable contribution to the scientific community at the time. This was the work that allowed me to get my PhD with all of the other elements of this, the rest of this thesis, and it made the cover of the Proceedings of the National Academy of Sciences. So we know that diversity is valuable. When people ask me, Sammy, how did you come to this conclusion when there were so many other researchers who were studying this organism, thousands of other researchers who have been studying this organism? Why were you the one to figure out this really important link in the chain of understanding how this parasite impacts the bees? Well, I think what people think I'm going to say during those interviews, and this question has come up many times, I think what they think I'm going to say is, well, I mean, I worked harder than those people, or I was smarter than those other people. I was more clever. I don't think that's the case. I think what the case is that I was able to bring a different way of looking at the problem. I asked a different question. I saw the problem differently as a result of the background that I've had. And it's not a better background. It's simply a different background that has allowed me to look at the problem-solving process differently and come to a different conclusion than the one that has had us stuck for more than half a century. So what's the problem? If we know that diversity is important, and we also know that we have a huge diversity issue, why are we still having such a problem here? Well, this is typically called by a lot of people the leaky pipeline issue. When we get to the undergraduate stage of the game, we're in a place where, well, the numbers are actually much closer to parity. About 50% of the individuals coming into undergraduate institutions are women. But for some reason, by the time we get to grad school, we lose a bunch of them. We lose about 13% there. And things just keep going down from there. With postdocs, we continue losing them. And by the time we get to assistant professors, only 24% of them are women. By the time we get to the promoted level, the associate professors who have received tenure, we're at about 22%. And by the time we get to the full professors and then eventually the National Academy of Sciences members, we're at 6%. Only 6% of those individuals are women at the very top of the ladder of science. It's been called a leaky pipeline as well when it comes to individuals of African who are African American or from the African diaspora. We typically have distributed throughout the United States, about 12% of our population is Black. And so for the individuals who are first-year college students, about 13.4% of our first-year college students are Black. But those numbers change quite dramatically when you get into different fields, like chemistry, where only about 7.9% of those who obtain bachelor's degrees are Black. And by the time we get to grad school, not even 5%. And by the time we get to chemistry professors, 1.6%. But I actually disagree with this whole leaky pipeline thing. Leaky pipelines make it sound like it's more of a passive system than I think that it actually is. I think in a lot of ways it's a sieve, and I have good reasons for thinking that. Um, there are, if if individuals were just falling through this leaky pipeline, you would expect that you would be hemorrhaging individuals from all the different classes at the same time. But a sieve strains out certain things and allows others through, or a semi-permeable membrane, which allows certain things to cross and others not to. Well, let me tell you a little bit about my own graduate school experience, and I think that in some ways it can be helpful for you to understand what a sieve can look like in motion, in action, in an actual graduate school program. When I first joined the University of Maryland in September of 2012, I started my fall semester, and I was told pretty immediately that it would be a better idea for me to take the safer option. I probably shouldn't be a PhD student. I was told it really seemed like a better idea that I consider going in that direction. And so after a couple of hours of going back and forth about this with my advisor at the time, I explained I wanted to be an entomologist since I was 7. I've already conducted independent research. I've met all the qualifications for starting the PhD program. I really want to go into the PhD program and finish my degree. Well, by the time we reached my committee meeting, things got really interesting in a really confusing way. I worked very hard. I was told in order to get to that meeting, well, if you really want to be a PhD student, then you need to make sure that you maintain above a 3.5 GPA, and we will allow you to pursue your PhD. But I maintained a 4.0 GPA and had a really solid project, and was still told when I reached my first committee meeting, I'm sorry, it's not your grades, it's not your project, there's just something about you that just doesn't seem like doctoral material. And as a result, I'm dismissing you from the program. So I was surprised by this. I went to speak with my ombudsperson. I went to speak with someone from the graduate school who could help me understand what had just happened here. And when it became clear that I had spoken with someone, well, things got really interesting really quickly. I was called naive for believing that I had the capacity to finish the program when my mentor at the time had told me that I simply did not have that capacity. I was told I should have believed this individual because of the substantial amount of time that they had spent as a professor. The email that came through the day that I went to seek a second opinion there was a pretty rough one to see. The two of us have a serious problem. My advisor emailed to me, my sense is that you don't understand the magnitude of your actions. This represents a trust issue, or a lack of trust issue, I should say. You don't trust my opinion as your advisor, or for that matter, the opinion of 3 additional faculty members. This does not make for a good working environment, and I find it a difficult and unappealing situation. At this time, I'm working through how I want to proceed, given the circumstances, the above issue, and your performance overall. So I thought, maybe I should find out what this whole thing about my performance overall is. Maybe something has happened here. Maybe I offended someone. Maybe there is an opaque issue here that I'm not seeing through. So, in my own words,
thinking maybe I had potentially offended a faculty member, I decided to set up a meeting with my advisor for us to sit down and talk this through. In that meeting, I was told, oh, Sammy, of course I like you. This is nothing personal. You just don't have the skill set for science. I said, okay, what is the skill set for science? And why are you so confident that I don't have it? Well, I can't quite put my finger on what it is that you're missing, but I can tell you that it's not there. Well, we should go back on. Surprise, I graduated. Okay. She told me, I can't quite put my finger on it, but I can tell you that it's not there. You're going to have to trust me. And you shouldn't be surprised. You were a high-risk student to begin with. Ooh. So, in defense of their decision, my committee members sent me a barrage of emails telling me that it was a, quote, mistake for me to have been allowed into the PhD program to begin with. I tried to remain composed, but every single email was a sledgehammer to the structural supports of my self-confidence.
Yeah, it was a rough time. I will admit, it was difficult to navigate through this process. That's the reason why I ended up giving this talk when the National Geographic Society honored me with the award of the Wayfinder. They asked me if I could talk about what my experience has been like as a researcher, and if there was anything about it that really stood out as important for people to understand. And so I wanted to talk about imposter syndrome. I wanted to talk about the difficulties of navigating a system when you don't look or sound anything like the other individuals there, and how that can strain out people who don't fit the norm. Well, as this process continued, I decided that it would probably be better for me to seek help from outside of the department. I eventually went to the dean. The dean originally told me that he could help, but then after talking to the department, he told me, you know, it really seems like they're doing this for your own good. I really think that you should ask nicely and see if you might be able to stay in the department, which obviously didn't work. I did ask nicely, and that didn't work out. But I continued the appeals process, and well,
I appealed to the dean, embarking on a process that took 10 months, more than a dozen meetings, and a search for the one person in the department willing to let me continue my degree progress under their tutelage. But eventually, that was the process that saw me reinstated into the PhD program. And that is when the real fight began. See, when I was reinstated, the criticisms of me didn't stop. No, they only intensified, filling the interstitial space of every hallway with deafening whispers about my inadequacy. The sort of whispers you know they want you to hear. One committee member, former committee member, even took the time to tell me in person that if I was allowed to continue on in this program as a doctoral student, he would quit. Another hail of imposter syndrome. Every day, I had to walk the halls of that department with an unbroken stream of people walking towards me who would rather slip into hell itself than speak or even look me in the eye. I was frozen out day after day after day until I didn't even feel like a person anymore on the 4th floor of that old brick building.
but there is a happy ending to this story.
After 3 years of working on a new thesis and working with a new host organism, the honeybee, I could finally see the sun peeking out from behind the clouds. They say everyone loves a winner. Now, I wouldn't quite say everyone, but when I represented my university and the United States in the International 3-Minute Thesis Competition, where I won first place in both categories in recognition of my research achievements, some thoughts about me changed. Yeah. Suddenly, a person or two spoke in the hallway. Congratulations for my achievements appeared on the departmental website, and soon I was the face of the entire advertising campaign for the university. And then it finally happened. I received the degree that I had been working on for from 23 years prior as a 7-year-old armed only with curiosity and a well-used library card. I became Dr. Samuel Ramsey, PhD. Soon after that, I received the Alumni Excellence Award for exceptional advances in research from the same university that tried so hard not to educate me to be a researcher.
Now, I've been asked many times, and there's much more to that video. And if you're interested in seeing it, I can send the link out, and you can all watch the rest of that video. But I've been asked many times now, why have I chosen to start talking about this? That was a really difficult time in my life, a really difficult set of memories to attempt to dig through. I took contemporaneous notes at all the different meetings at that time and hadn't looked at them in, I mean, almost half a decade when I made this talk. And I went back to them and really looked at how difficult this experience was and how just a lot of people would not have just continued to deal with all of that to get that degree. That also wasn't the way that other students in that department were treated. So why am I talking about all of this now? Is it because I'm bitter? Am I angry? Do I want vengeance? It's none of that. Actually, because I went through that set of experiences, I believe I am much better set up now to do exactly what it is that I want to do. I am able to navigate through things with a level of confidence that I did not have before I went into that problem, or before I went into that program. And I truly believe that I have inside of me everything that I need to accomplish anything that I set my mind to, despite any competition or any opposition that comes from within or without. Imposter syndrome can't hold me back anymore. So I don't tell this story because I'm bitter. I ended up in the right place. I changed labs, started working with a different advisor, started working with a project that really allowed me to show what I could do. But I have to talk about this, despite the fact that individuals have told me, if you talk about this, you will face reprisals from your previous professor. The university could get upset with you. It may even impact your ability to get tenure in the future. Maybe you should wait until after you've gotten tenure and then tell your story. I don't want to do that. I want to tell this story while it has maximum power, while it is relevant, and while it can potentially help someone else. There were problems in a lab consistently at the University of Wisconsin-Madison that over decades, complaints were made and students were not listened to. And it took a student committing suicide in order for anyone's voice to be heard in that context, and in order for any changes to be made, in order for all of those complaints, those formal complaints, to be acknowledged. I don't want things to have to be that extreme. I tell this story because people shouldn't have to be as determined as I was to make it. People shouldn't have to have the same support system that I had. I have amazing, amazing family that rallied around me and really helped keep me sane through that process and all the intense loneliness that existed in it. We say that we stand for justice and equity and diversity and inclusion in science, but oftentimes it is just that. It is words. It is a cool acronym, JEDI, but it doesn't seem to accomplish much. And so I think we have to face down these stories because systemic bias really doesn't like to look in mirrors. And so sometimes I have to hold that mirror up and even chase systemic bias around a little bit and be like, no, you have to look at this. You've got to see what you look like. You have to see what the consequences of your actions look like. And I also want you to know that things don't have to be this way. Let's take a lesson from biology. We started off talking a fair bit about biology, and that is my wheelhouse. So let's talk about primary and secondary succession and how it works when an ecosystem has been upset in certain ways. The lack of diversity can be fixed in these ecosystems, but a lot of attempts to fix diversity problems within an ecosystem fail. And what we've realized as the scientific community is that you can't fix a set of circumstances where a new species, what we typically refer to as a colonizing species, when a colonizing species shows up and it changes the environment, you can't think that just reintroducing all the species that went extinct into that environment again is going to allow that environment to become diverse again. Because oftentimes, colonizing species change the environment around them such that it only works for them. It is only suitable for their growth, their development, and their ability to thrive, and everything else tends to get excluded. But them and a few species that are very similar to them. And so if we want to make sure that an environment can be healthy for a diversity of organisms, we have to return that environment. We have to change elements of that environment so that it is once again suitable to other creatures that aren't just the colonizing species. And this is a lesson from biology that has actually been borne out in experimentation. When you return the nutrients to the soil that have been removed by the colonizing species that has started to exclude the resident community in an area, you can allow for that area to be healthy again, such that reintroducing those organisms can allow for them to exist in that space again. If we are going to actually strive for justice and equity and inclusion, in addition to diversity, instead of just going out and trying to recruit as many people of color as we can so that the numbers look really nice for our graduate program or for our faculty, we have to make sure that when they get there, the environment isn't just set up for one group of individuals to thrive, but that environment is set up so that other individuals feel comfortable, so that other individuals believe that their thoughts are worthwhile and can be heard, so that other individuals have the capacity to thrive there as well. So what can we do? Well, we need to start working hard to establish a suitable environment for all researchers and not just work hard to recruit people to these programs. One faculty that I was talking to at one point, I have to make sure I'm being discreet now, I disclose different things, but I remember talking to them about, okay, there are 0 people of color in the entirety of your department, but you've bragged quite a bit about diversity programs that you have put in place and how hard you guys have worked to establish diversity. What do you think has been an impediment to that actually being borne out? And the biggest issue that was disclosed there was that retention has been a big deal. They've recruited a lot of people. They can't seem to retain them. They all leave after a few years. They go to a different environment, a different university. Well, within graduate school, there's a lot that we can do to make the environment more suitable to other people. I think advisor-student contracts are a great way to avoid imposter syndrome just taking over in these situations, and to avoid advisors from moving the goalpost whenever they want to, which stokes more and more and more imposter syndrome in those individuals. If we can have a contract where it is written out in the beginning, where the student and the advisor have the agency to discuss these are the things that are expected so that they know what's expected of them and they then know what to expect from the other, that allows for the system to work much more equitably. I think we need to reform the way that tenure is structured, because unfortunately, tenure exists like qualified immunity for professors. It creates a set of circumstances where even when egregious issues are very apparent about different professors, nothing can really be done about it because that individual has tenure. And that creates a system where individuals who don't want to see the demographics change around them can do things about that in broad daylight, in the open, and nothing can be done as a result of that for the sake of accountability. I think we need to make sure that it's clear that the power imbalance that exists between the advisor and the advisee is one where we're going to make sure to intervene and protect our students. Because going into a system where you feel uniquely vulnerable, where you feel like you don't have the capacity to protect yourself is a set of circumstances that minority individuals deal with already in so many other contexts. And sometimes they don't want to enlist for 5 years, 4 years, 2 years of dealing with that again, in a set of circumstances where they can put a huge amount of work into a project, into developing an entire new system, and then be told by their advisor, I've simply decided on a whim, this has nothing to do with your grades, this has nothing to do with your project. I just don't think that you're doctoral material. I don't think that you're researcher material. And then dismissal. They should have to give a real reason. And that real reason should have to go through a system of accountability through at least one other person who could look at that and say, this doesn't really seem right. And in order for us to truly establish an environment that works for everyone, we have to ensure that there is clarity when people come into these programs such that they understand how they can navigate through this system. Oftentimes the system relies on people just knowing. And oftentimes the people who just know are individuals who come from backgrounds where their family are already professors. Their brother and sister have already gone through graduate school. They've got uncles who are in the National Academy of Sciences. And oftentimes minority individuals and underrepresented groups like women don't always have that capacity going. And that can make it very difficult to navigate that system. So people need to know how the system works. When I went into graduate school, I asked my advisor what the milestones were that were necessary for me to graduate. My advisor told me, just ask someone, ask another graduate student. Really? You're not going to tell me? And under a lot of circumstances, the advisors don't know because you're not trained for that. The only thing that you are really trained for is to be a scientist. You're not trained to mentor students. You're oftentimes not even trained to teach. And that does a serious disservice to students. We also need to know what the matters of recourse are if there are issues that come up. What can I do? Well, now that I'm a professor at the University of Colorado Boulder with the Biofrontiers Institute and the Ecology and Evolutionary Biology Department, now that I'm on the inside, I have the ability to hold the door open for other people. I have the ability to establish the sort of environment that I was just talking to you about. And I will tell you this, I'm going to do everything in my power to establish a system of justice, equity, diversity, and inclusion where I work. And what can you do? You can act. Don't be an ally. Ally yourself. Make sure that this is a verb, that you are continuously working in whatever capacity that you have when you see these problems manifest. If any of you are in academia or even adjacent to it, the ability to speak up and use whatever privilege you may have can change someone else's life. Thank you very much for listening. And if there are any questions, I would love to answer them.
Awesome. Yes, we definitely have a lot of comments in the chat and a couple questions to get to as well. And I just want to echo the sentiments of a lot of folks who have been in the chat box just saying thank you for sharing your story. And I'll also share that I am also a master's student for the Masters of Landscape Architecture program at UMD.
Oh.
But it has been difficult trying to work full time and also complete a master's program. It is almost nearly impossible sometimes. So I really relate to your ideas about transforming higher education and that there's so much more kind of, internal change that needs to happen in order to actually make these programs really, truly accessible.
Absolutely. I'm really glad that you understand the struggle here.
Yes, not quite to the level of what you went through, but absolutely, I get it, and I echo your thoughts. And I'm so happy that you're now in a position to be one of the people who can actually take on this challenge and make that change. So thank you for your work.
Thank you.
So I'll go back through the questions, kind of starting from the beginning.
Okay.
We were talking a little bit about evolution. We had a comment, someone was curious, have creatures learned to change or has evolution caused their change?
Ooh. So evolution is a really fascinating thing, and it can be very difficult it can be very difficult to avoid attributing a will to evolution or kind of anthropomorphizing it. But evolution itself has acted on these organisms through the diversity that exists in their genetics. So when they go into an environment, and this is a competitive exclusion sort of situation, we call this fundamental niche theory. If an organism goes into an environment and there are other creatures that are in that environment doing what that organism does best, evolution drives that population to find a new thing to do best. And that allows for diversity to branch out more and more and more. You get more organisms and more organisms with the capacity to solve problems in tons of different ways. So at the same time that evolution is imposing change, the organisms themselves are learning new things and changing along with it.
Wonderful. I know that's always a popular question in evolution type discussions. The next question is, are we manipulating and increasing diversity with some of the things that we do, such as gene technology?
Oh, so we are definitely increasing the diversity of groups of organisms with the ways that we manipulate, with the ways that we manipulate them through breeding and targeted breeding, looking for specific genes, and even targeting or using things like CRISPR. But a lot of the things that we are targeting genes on are not wild organisms. They are organisms that we are working with in a lab, or organisms that we are working with in a very contained field in an agricultural setting. And so it typically doesn't increase the diversity of the greater population. Evolution acts on the population level to change the diversity of genes within a population. And so if those organisms don't enter into the natural population, they actually don't increase its diversity.
Great. Awesome. Makes sense. We have one guest who's looking for a little bit of hope. So they noticed some of the data from the gender and demographics of the scientists was from 2002 or some other.
Oh, yeah. Mm-hmm.
They wanted to know if there's been any improvement in recent years.
There has been improvement by almost 2 percentage points, which is very nice. It is kind of something that fluctuates from year to year, but on average, we're doing almost 2% better than that set of numbers. So there is a trajectory. We just very much hope that that trajectory can go faster, because it looks like at this rate, it would take at least 71 years for us to reach parity. And that's a little bit too long.
Yeah, I would agree. All right. Oh, we do have a recommendation for you to write a children's book. And
you know, it is the funniest thing that you would say that, because I was just approached by someone who writes children's books about whether I would be interested in writing a children's book or collaborating with them on creating one. And
fantastic.
That's hilarious.
Well, we all vote yes in case we have a vote in your answer.
Thank you very much. I'll send it to the group if ever this does come to fruition.
All right. So the next question is related to your experience that you went through with the university. Did anybody ever acknowledge exactly what it was that they felt you were missing, and did they apologize?
Thank you for referring to it as it, because that's how we talked about it for a good long time. It was consistently veiled under it. And so I was told, that you're missing something in the skill set. And so, of course, I asked, what exactly is it, in a number of different meetings, and no one would tell me. A couple of my committee members even told me they know what it is, but they don't feel like there is any point in telling me. It is better that I simply go to another program. Well, I eventually had another researcher from outside of the department ask that question while I was in earshot at a conference. And my advisor told this individual, I really can't quite put my finger on what it is, but it's sort of an X factor, and he just doesn't have it. So
got it.
Just don't have it.
Well, maybe that's not the it that people need to be having then. If that's
I think that there are multiple its. And because
Yeah.
we've spent so long thinking that there is one it, if we
Mm,
see somebody and they just don't look like what we're used to, we assume you don't have the capacity to be successful in science. And that is
right.
really upsetting and really sad.
It is our differences are truly what makes the world go round. It's kind of it's hard to hear when folks only kind of focus on one thing because it's, even just in our daily lives when we're going about doing all these different things, you wouldn't want your doctor to also be, the person who is making your dinner at the restaurant. Like,
Exactly.
everyone has different skills and different strengths.
Precisely. I mean, there were days where you went to the same guy. He was your blacksmith, he was your dentist, he was your cook. And now we have a broader field of people that have been able to specialize in all these different fields.
Exactly.
Everybody doesn't have to look the same and do the same thing.
Yes. Agreed. Um, Someone had a comment, did faculty at UMD never hear the statement that a mind is a terrible thing to waste?
I think you are quoting correctly, Noreen. A
Yes.
mind is a terrible thing to waste. And unfortunately, it doesn't seem like that particular adage really made it deep down into their hearts and minds. I think that there was a desire to maintain a very particular feel to the department that I was changing just by my mere existence. And so they didn't feel like they were wasting a mind. They felt like they were sending it off to somewhere where it would be more comfortable because this isn't the environment for it. There was also a second half to the question above that I forgot to answer of, did anyone apologize? No
Mhm.
one has apologized. And I've been told never to expect an apology by some individuals who work at the University of Maryland and who were kind of talking to me about this as I was nearing graduation, just saying, one person did apologize, I should say that. But they were telling me that academics really, really, really need being right. It's kind of like our thing. We do science, we learn things. Um, Kind of our reputation as someone who understands the world around us is very important. And so oftentimes that leads to people, even when they do make mistakes, really not wanting to acknowledge them. I will say that one faculty member did actually send me an email after reading my thesis and apologized and said, you know what, this is one of the best written theses that I've seen come out of this department. You've clearly worked very hard, and I'm really sorry for the role that I've played in trying to exclude
Wow.
you from this program. And that was really healing for me, even though my
Yeah.
advisor never apologized and none of the individuals on my committee ever apologized.
Wow. It's so interesting that you mentioned the need to be correct because I mean, I personally feel like in academia, I make so many mistakes and I learn much from my mistakes as I
Me
do
too.
from when something goes successful. So
Mhm.
it's a missed opportunity to learn from.
I agree. It is a huge missed opportunity. We gain so much from just that moment of saying, you know what? I was wrong about that. That is how science grows. That is how science benefits and
It
progresses.
is.
It's through us realizing we were wrong about this thing and then adding this new set of data so that we reach a more correct opinion than before or
Exactly.
perspective than before.
And the minute you think that you know everything is the minute you stop learning. And then,
Exactly.
there's always something to learn for
Mm-hmm.
even the most well-versed expert on any subject.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, I digress. So someone wants to know what you're working on now.
Ahaha. I am now a professor at CU Boulder, and so I am currently working on getting my lab all set up. I just got here less than a month ago, just started teaching classes and ordering all the supplies for my lab. I am so excited though, because we've established a research station. Oh, I didn't realize I was sitting so far down. We've established a research station in Thailand. And so I'll be able to conduct a good portion of my research in Southeast Asia. We've got a trip planned to Nepal and Korea and Singapore in January, and I'll get to collect samples of honeybees from these different areas and compare their parasite loads. I'm also doing this whole project where I'm looking at how the hornets that have arrived in the US got here. And so we're tracing them genetically all the way back to their donor population, which means I have to go pretty much everywhere in Asia and collect samples of hornets with
Wow.
my two postdocs who are super
Nice.
cool. And I'm just really, really, really excited.
Fantastic. And then also kind of related to the other work, we had a question about your research with the varroa mites. Do you have a solution, if any, for combating their infestation of honeybees, and how did the feral bee population start to come back?
Great questions. And that's a multifaceted one. So let me tackle it in two different directions. I just told you about the international research that I'm conducting, but while I'm here, my attention is trained on Varroa and utilizing my understanding of their feeding behavior and their capacity to feed on the fat body tissue of the bee, using that against them to create a systemic option for treatment that can reduce the amount of pesticide put into the environment and potentially drive these suckers down in their population levels so that they are not such a huge issue for our bees. Now, in the populations of bees that have rebounded, remember the statement that I said earlier about how evolution, the currency of evolution is diversity. There was some diversity in the honeybee genome. It wasn't adequate to distribute these diversity genes throughout the entire population of bees, but there was some diversity there. And so in the pockets where that diversity where that diversity existed, the bees that didn't have the sets of genes that were related to tolerance to the mites died out, and a few groups of bees that did have tolerance to the mites have started to crop up in these areas. Now, they haven't been snatched up by beekeepers as the new genetic stock of bees to work with. We still don't know everything that we want to know about them, how the sets of genes that have been exemplified here are going to impact the temperament of the bees, whether they're going to be really cranky and sting everybody, how that impacts the amount of honey that they collect and how frequently they swarm. But we are very interested in finding out what elements of their genetics have allowed them to survive and figuring out how to get that into the broader population.
Excellent. And then also related to some of your work, and this person clearly knows more about the area that you work in than I do, but they're asking, have you done any studies with cordyceps as a parasite? Apologies.
The cordyceps. Oh, no worries. No worries. I love cordyceps. They're super cool. Cordyceps are particularly well specialized fungal parasites of insects and arthropods in general, where they can kind of take over the body of an arthropod, sometimes changing their behavior, but in all circumstances, killing it and causing fungal hyphae to grow out of the body of that creature and then distribute huge amounts of spores so that more creatures are then infected by it. And so it's a self-propagating fungal pesticide, if you will. Now, cordyceps tends to be pretty specialized, and what we have never found is a cordyceps that's specialized to varroa mites. And a big reason for that is because varroa mites live inside of a honeybee colony with a bunch of bees. And the reason why so many creatures want to live inside of that honeybee colony, and the reason why bees have to have stingers and the ability to defend that colony, is because it's a great place to live. There's always food, it's perfectly temperature and humidity controlled, and you have around-the-clock security detail willing to keep anything out of there that could possibly eat the contents of that colony. And that includes creatures that would eat the varroa mites. And so they're constantly cleaning the place, getting rid of fungal spores, getting rid of bacteria and buildup. And they are also getting rid of predators who could potentially come in and eat things like varroa mites, because bees are just very fastidious cleaners. That allows for varroa to be usually pretty susceptible to these kinds of issues. But unfortunately, when they're inside of the colony, their susceptibility is brought a lot lower because of the fact that the bees are there to protect everything in that colony.
Awesome. That's fascinating. Okay, so we've got just 3 more questions. First one is,
video.
Does evolution imply more and more specialization?
Evolution does imply more. It's not always necessarily going to be specialization in the way that you think. Every creature isn't going to choose to specialize in one plant or another. That depends on what community it's in. So in different communities where sets of nutrients are lacking. So if we think about bogs, because of the ways that when plants are dying in a bog, they fall into this water that's hypoxic, and a lot of the bacteria that would normally recycle the nutrients aren't able to do so. And so all of those nutrients get bound up in that bog water. And so you end up with a lot of creatures that are specialized to be predators because they can't eat the plants that are constantly falling into the water. So you see a lot of specialist predator insects. You even see a lot of not parasitic plants, predatory plants. Things like Venus flytraps, you're typically more likely to see them in boggy areas. So those sorts of circumstances will drive quite a bit of specialization when an area itself has very, very, very distinctive environmental cues. But when an area has a really broad set of nutrients and environmental niches and things, creatures will, there will be a bunch of creatures that will develop as specialists, but also a bunch of creatures that will develop as generalists because they can enjoy their lives and survive pretty well going around and feeding on different creatures. But there are even specialized ways to be a generalist. And that is an element of specialization that you'll consistently see in these systems.
Awesome. Thank you.
Of course.
We had a request for the link to the video snippets that you shared.
So I'll put it in the chat, and there will be some people inevitably who won't be able to get it from the chat before the website shuts down. And so, or before.
That's okay, no worries. I can send it on.
So that's what I was going to maybe suggest there. So here is the link to the video. I've added it. Oh, that just adds it for the host and panelists. Here it is for everyone.
Perfect. Thank you.
Yeah, you're welcome.
Okay, so one question kind of referring back to your work in academia. So obviously getting administrators and advisors to appreciate the value of diversity is the best solution. But in the interim, is there something that can be done to eliminate prejudice? For instance, anonymously evaluating applications or rules requiring qualifications like grades and achievements being considered. It's stunning to this guest that the process allowed for such subjectivity and personal prejudice.
Ooh, okay. Yeah. I see you over there, anonymous attendee. Very well stated question, and I understand that so well because I thought when I went to the ombudsperson to talk about this that it was going to be a really quick and easy thing to clear up because it was very clear to my mind, and I thought to any reasonable person, that what had happened here was very wrong and should be rectified. What I found in that context was that in the eyes of the university and based on the regulations that are maintained by the university, there was nothing wrong with what happened there, or at least I should say nothing against regulation. That individual that individual who served as my advisor is still at the university, and there were no reprimands in that system because as it was put to me, an advisor's decisions are close to God. This isn't about this individual doing something wrong to you. This individual simply decided that you shouldn't be here anymore, and you have to understand that that is fully within this individual's rights and powers as a professor. Now, think about it this way. When you graduate as an undergraduate student, you're going to get a diploma, and you're going to be told as you're handed that diploma that you have satisfied the regulations and stipulations of the University of blank to get the degree of blank, and is being conferred to you. But when you get a degree that is a graduate degree, you will be told that you have satisfied the requirements of the university, your department, and your advising faculty member. The requirements of the department, the requirements of the university are all clearly defined. But the requirements of your faculty member can change at any moment for any reason. And with good actors, that's not a problem. But unfortunately, it does create a pretty broad capacity for problems to crop up when individuals don't behave in good faith. And I don't want to get too, into controversial subjects here, but there are a lot of people asking for reforms within places like police departments. And what is frequently said in that context is, we don't want to add more onerous regulations to these individuals. But I think if you are working in a capacity where you are serving the public, where you are helping people, where you are teaching people, you should be willing to have oversight. You should be willing to have people, you should be willing to make sure that what it is that you're doing can't be easily co-opted and used against individuals who have less power than you. And unfortunately, the same level of pushback that we see when individuals ask for reforms so that people who look like me don't get shot at such a high rate by police officers, we have people who are pushing back heavily against the idea that there should be any reforms to the ways that the system currently works. And so I'm hoping that the system will change, but all the things that you've just disclosed as things that you would like to see change are things that I have also explained to the university, that I think that these things should change, and all of them were rejected. I was told that they would not fly, that professors would not be okay with that.
Yeah, I think it's those positions that involve a level of vulnerability with those that you serve in that position that, there should be a lot more sensitivity and training and carefulness in the way that those folks realize how their actions affect other people's lives.
For sure.
Great. All right. So we got one more that snuck in here. I think questions are popping up as we talk about some of the other questions. So back now to your varroamite work. Because the original hypothesis wasn't exactly what folks thought, how has the science community and the bee community accepted your research?
That is a great question. And I really should acknowledge that when I first started interacting with all of the different beekeepers in this community, I really wasn't sure what to expect with how they would accept the work that I was putting forward. But I was sure when I went into graduate school in academia that I wouldn't have to worry about acceptance and things of that nature, about acceptance of myself or my work or anything, because academia is this, this group of very enlightened people who just want the best information, and they shouldn't care where it comes from. Well, where I truly saw that was with beekeepers. Beekeepers wanted whatever it was that was going to help their bees. Beekeepers wanted to see that information be disseminated far and wide. And I have them to thank in a lot of ways for why my career has gone in the direction that it has, because I've refined my capacity to give presentations, to be a public speaker and do outreach, because beekeepers wanted me speaking at every possible bee meeting around the world. In 1 year, I gave 82 different talks, I gave 82 talks to 82 different groups.
Wow.
Around the United States and around the world, everywhere from New Zealand and Canada and Bristol and Thailand to tons of different places in the US. And I've been to almost all the states now. So it's been very well accepted by the beekeeping community.
Awesome.
And as well, that has really allowed for me to learn how to process and explain all of this, to distill it down into a really good paper that was also very well accepted by the scientific community.
Awesome. Well, that's great. I think it's wonderful to kind of end on that good note and that positive note. We've been through all the questions, and if you have a moment, I recommend reading the chat, because everyone, including myself, is just so appreciative of you sharing this important information, not only your research, which has also clearly been very impactful, but your story. And I think for a lot of folks that are on with us tonight, they just were so encouraged and inspired by your story. And we're so grateful to you for taking this evening to share your story with us. So thank you so much.
Thank you. I really appreciate it. And I was surprised when the Master Gardeners of the University of Maryland wanted specifically this talk. And I was like, uh-oh, yes. I hope they know what they're getting themselves into, because I'm about to talk about some things and stuff. But I really appreciate that you were all very much down for this. And this has been a great question and answer and everything. Thank you for all the support in the chat.
Yeah, absolutely. It's a wonderful conversation, and we've already had requests to have you back, and of course for your children's book. So I'm sure we'll be working together again in the future.
Thank you. Oh my gosh, I'm saving this chat.
Please do. It's fantastic.